Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are joining us for Digital Twins in Oil and Gas. My name is Nicole Bamford, and I'm the moderator for today's event. On behalf of Leslie and the team, we thank you for joining us. This panel presentation, Immersive Digital Twins Transforming Training and Virtual Reality, will be given by Anthony Del Barto, Learning Technology Manager at BP, Brent Kedzierski, Head of Shell Learning Strategy and Innovation at Shell International, Mercelo Fernandez, Product Owner for Digital Twin and Rich Media at Chevron, and your panel moderator today will be Gavin Taylor, Vice President Global Sales and Strategy at 3T Energy Group, and their discussion promises to be well worth the listen. Before we get started, here are some quick administrative points. During the webinar, if you have questions for the panelists, please submit them in the Q&A box on your screen, and these will be answered during the question portion of the session. Likewise, for any technical issues, please write them into the Q&A box and we'll get to them right away. The widgets on your screen can be resized and dragged around for your viewing preferences. We encourage you to visit the Resource Center on your screen for additional content and resources we and our sponsors have provided for you. So make sure you're sitting comfortably, and I'll now hand it over to Gavin so we can begin.
Thanks, Nicole. Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon where I am in the UK. I'm really delighted to be invited to host this panel session, and I'm actually really excited to discuss a topic which seems to be right at the forefront of industry mindset at the moment. So I'm hoping for a very engaging panel discussion. As an agenda, what we're looking to go through today, firstly, Anthony, Mercelo, Brent and myself will have an interactive panel discussion around the use of digital twins and VR for a learning perspective. What I'd then like to do is give some real live examples of how my organization, 3T Energy Group, has helped some of our clients navigate through the use of digital twins from a learning perspective. And some of the things we've learned along the way there as a business. And we also want to invite audience participation through the Q&A, which Nicole mentioned. My hope here is that we keep it pretty interactive throughout, so I'd like to try and have questions from the audience through the whole session, and I'll try and pick out those questions both during the session and then with a dedicated session at the end. So please, fire in questions as we're discussing things. We'll be happy to pick those up. But we'll go into the first part of the session, which will be a discussion between the panelists around digital twins and how they're being used within their own organizations and what their perspective is. So I'm going to go with the first question to the panel. I've been working with digital twins with the oil and gas industry for a number of years now, and what I have found is that different people have different perspectives on what a digital twin means to them. And my first question to the panel is, what does a digital twin mean to you as an organization? And I'll put that first to Mercelo.
Hey, good morning, good afternoon. So in Chevron, a digital twin is a virtual representation of a physical asset or system that reflects the current reality, right? So pretty much this representation will use integrated data, providing easy and intuitive access to make data-driven business decisions and support workflows. So our digital twins are composed by three main components, that is data, analytics and modeling, and visualization, right? So for intelligent predicting versus predetermined scenarios, what we think is that intelligent prediction is at a later stage of the maturity curve, right? You usually want to start your digital twins with simple cases that you can keep growing and learning as you go.
Thanks, Mercelo. Within that, are you almost envisaging that with a digital twin, there needs to be some kind of artificial intelligence within the twin so that it's continuously learning and predicting analysis?
Yeah, so as I said, you have different maturity levels for your digital twins, right? So as you said, people consider digital twin different things, right? So depending on what you consider a digital twin, the oil gas industry is working with digital twins for at least 30 years, right? But in different maturity levels. So right now we have access to different computing resources. We have the benefit of the cloud computing now, so you can instantiate computing resources more easily. You can use VR in a more fluid way. So you have access to machine learning services on the cloud. So all these will facilitate more advanced cases of digital twins. And the prescriptive, right, the predictive capabilities of a digital twin, it's on a later stage of the maturity curve. So if you're not there yet, I think you should start with a simple case, just create an MVP of a visual digital twin, and then you grow to the point that you can create more predictive capabilities on your digital twins with the use of machine learning and artificial intelligence.
Thanks for that. Just to bring a different perspective on it, Brent, do you want to give us your view on what a digital twin means to you and your organization?
Sure. Thanks, Gavin. If you look at the history, so when we were in, say, Industry 3.0, the information age, to many people, they thought a digital twin was, say, a Kindle book. So you have a book like behind me, and it's hardbound, I can flip through it, but you make it digital on a device. That was in the information age, where it was really just making it digital. In Industry 4.0, we have the cyber physical connectivity. So it's very important that you get the operational definitions down. And I think to what Mercelo said, there's levels. So for the operational definition of a digital twin, in this industry, it means that it's cyber physically connected. So it has features and benefits that are different than just a Kindle book. So for example, we had operators in one of our refineries that thought they had gone digital with their procedures because they had taken paper procedures and made them into PDF. Well, they really weren't interactive or anything, so that really wasn't a digital procedure in today's sense, right? So when we look at digital twins, say, for example, in our major investment into operator training simulators, you can have a simulator of a part of a hydrocracker that's a simulator that's a representation of how that system will work, but it's not exact, okay? It doesn't emulate or it doesn't recreate exactly what the real piece of equipment would do in a real scenario. So there's these levels that you can get to, and you pay for those different levels. So just like in a digital procedure today, if you take it where it's dynamically content and you manage the content at a component level where you can tag and index each piece of content, you're releasing the power of digitization. So so really today's aspiration is to get a digital twin to be a full functioning representation of what that system or process or device would do in the actual real environment. So it's going to depend on what your purpose and what you're trying to do with that digital twin, and that determines how much you invest in it to make it more and more exact. So if you only need to do it for simple things that get generalized concepts, you don't need all the full features of a digital twin. But if you're at something that's high risk and you want that digital twin to do exactly what the real piece of equipment would do, then you're going to invest the dollars to actually make it do everything the real piece of equipment would do. But it's always based on the intent and what you're trying to do with that digital twin. So that's where I'd stop.
Yeah, I mean, Brent, that's a great perspective, and it's definitely the challenge I often have with clients is what do they expect from the digital twin, particularly when it comes to using it in a learning perspective. And it's that difference between artificial intelligence, i.e. predictive learning and predictive analysis, versus something that's just been embedded within the VR digital twin, a bit like a game, a bit like a computer game. So, Anthony,
I'll just add one more thing. The fallacy and the potential fault in the digital twin, and they can be hazardous if you don't have really smart people that know these things to release their power. So, for example, the military experienced something years and years ago where they introduced negative training. And that was when they gave something that was a simulation or a digital representation or a representation of something that actually taught people negatively because it didn't function the way the real piece of equipment did. So if you're an operator out there and you're using a so-called digital twin that doesn't really represent, you're training yourself how to work in a negative way. So when the real procedure happens, when the real emergency happens, you're not going to know how to do it in reality. So this is the caution that I put out there for anybody that's trying to do digital twins. You always have to go and start with what is the purpose, what is the intent that you're trying to do with that. Otherwise, you risk really doing more damage than good.
Yeah, good points, Brent. Anthony, just bringing you in on this, I have direct experience of working with your organisation on digital twins, so it'd be good to get your perspective on what a digital twin means to you as well.
Thanks for that, Gavin. Honestly, I can't add much more to my colleagues' existing comments. It's very much, and I think you keyed in on it, it's what do you intend to use that digital twin for? What's that value add? What's the metric you're trying to impact by leveraging that kind of technology? It's for me, in our organization, it's that visualization. It's recreating that environment. It's creating that simulation clone where you have a safe space where you can go in, you can practice and have a safe place to learn and fail. So in addition to what my colleague said, I really don't have anything to add in that space.
Thanks, Anthony. Just from an audience perspective as well, it's great to see some questions coming in and some of them very relevant to some of the things that we've had dialogue with ourselves prior to this session. So I'll pick a couple of those points up as we go through. One of the things we were talking about just while we were waiting to join the session was about our children and about their experience during this whole lockdown and how they've been engaged with virtual learning. And one of the things that I've been looking into myself is around the kind of evolving learning expectations from a different generation that are going to come into the workforce over the next 10 years. So a question to the panel would be around how do we, or what challenges are there going to be in the adoption of digital learning technologies in the different types of demographic we're going to have in our organizations over the next 10 years, i.e. some of the younger people coming through and obviously our existing workforce and their different perspectives on learning. And I'll start with you, Anthony, on that one. You're on mute, Anthony. That famous phrase.
Brilliant. Thanks for that, Gavin. It's really interesting. I think what we've noticed and where I've personally come from is that assumption that, you know, an older generation may not necessarily adopt these technologies as quickly as the new generation coming in. But from what we've seen, that's not necessarily the case. The kind of new generation coming into training, they do have a different expectation around how they can access information. It's about accessibility and ease of accessibility. For the other generation, I find that they're just as quick to adopt the technologies. It's just about having that value add, where maybe the new generation coming in, they've already seen it, they've lived in this world, they know these technologies. The other generation, the older generation, that includes myself, is really around, they need to see that value. What is there's a new tool that's going to be in my kit, whether it's a VR headset, an augmented reality headset, whatever that may be, it has to have a value add. It has to have a very tangible, making my life easier, making my job easier. Once that communication, once that connection is made, we find that they adopt the technology just as quickly, if not more so, than the generation that kind of comes in with the expectation that I can access content anytime, anywhere. So I think it's about marrying those two, making the content accessible to both, while at the same time reiterating that value add. Because I think if you're able to join those two messages together, you really are able to distribute that kind of technology and get that user level buy-in that you need to make it successful.
Sorry, I was on mute as well. They're great points, Anthony. And it's certainly the perspective I see is that initially there's often a little bit of fear factor, but once people get engaged, actually there's no fear factor. It erodes. And Mercelo, just to bring you in on that point, is there anything from your perspective you see in terms of intergenerational challenges with adoption of technology? I think there's a chance you're now on mute, Mercelo.
Yeah, he was spot on. People will engage if they see value, right? It can take some time because it's something new, right? So people will take some time to adjust to it. But depending on the value, they will engage. There will be no resistance. If it can help on their jobs, it will be a pretty straightforward process to be adopted, right? And what I see as well is that there's a lot of advancements on the headsets, for example. So if you get a comparison between the HoloLens, for example, the first version and the second version, you can see a great deal of improvement. It's lighter, it's more comfortable to use. You can adjust to your glasses, for example, and it has a 40% increase in the field of view in relation to the first generation. So companies are adjusting their devices as well to make it more accessible and to create a more fluid experience.
Yeah, and I want to pick up on some points around that in terms of the technological advancements as we move through. So great points there, Mercelo. Anything to add to that, Brent?
Yeah, well, first I got to laugh a little bit at Anthony calling himself an older generation. So if you look at some lines here, you might see an older generation. But look, we faced this a few years ago where we had many generations in the workforce. So we had a lot more baby boomers, Gen X, millennials, Gen, Z and Y and all, that. But when we first introduced it, and remember, we're not doing this stuff at scale yet across organizations in too many cases. So when Shell, for example, we roll out our operational VR modules, we're doing it to a specific population of operators. And within that, now we're finding that, most of I think the workforce now is at least 50% millennials. And then, you've got the rest of it. So that issue of having people that were technophobes is really going away fast. I do have millennials today that still say, well, I'm not a gamer, I don't do this, but then they come around pretty quick. Now, the boomer that would have said that, it took them a little bit longer, but we have fewer and fewer of those in the workplace now. So I don't see it so much as an issue for the two reasons. One, the people that are used to growing up with technology are a bigger representation of our population. And two, because we haven't yet reached scale where everything you touch is VR, digital, virtual, we're able to kind of take segments and carry them along and manage the change a little bit better. And then what we're doing is the people that aren't so experienced with the technology, we really try to create them to be mentors, more of the expertise around the technology than the actual technology themselves. So it's a nice relationship with the more experienced operators that are using the technology, really are acting as coaches to those using the content, and the less experienced operators are helping them with the technology. So it becomes a nice reciprocal relationship.
That's a great answer, Brent. I'm getting quite a few questions in, which is good to see. A few around ROI for digital twins, which is a question I'm gonna pose a little bit later on. One of the questions which resonates with me in particular, because the organisation I work for is also a simulation business, is simulation's been around for a long time. You have process simulation, you have drilling simulation. Where do you see the difference in terms of virtual reality in a sort of a digital twin environment versus some of these simulators, which are in essence digital twins as well? I'll stick with you, Brent, on that one, if you don't mind, just to put you on the spot.
Yeah, no, I am on the spot because I didn't quite get the essence of the question. So can you re-summarize that for me?
Yeah, so VR, the use of digital twins in VR is a concept that's relatively new, but the use of digital twins in other simulation tools, like drilling simulators or process simulators, is a little bit more well known. They've been around for a number of decades. Do you see a difference between simulation, i.e. a drilling simulator, say, versus virtual reality, the use of the digital twin in those different contexts?
Yeah, I mean, I think when we look at simulation, and it doesn't matter what the presentation method, VR, AR, mixed reality, whatever it is, or in the distribution method, because distribution methods always impact the capabilities of the technology. So delivering something on the cloud, it's less capable than doing something that's locally installed, for example. Okay, so that's one of the things. So right now there's pros and cons of each with the capacity. But when we look at simulation, we look at three things. We look at the difficulty of the task being done. And that means how difficult are the decisions, the nuances, how difficult are the problems to solve, and then how important are they to safe operation. So what potential does that task have on the environment, on the asset, on the individual population? And then it's the frequency of performance. So how often is that done? So within that matrix, we can figure out exactly how much we want to invest on simulating or virtualizing any given task. So it's really a methodical way to look at this stuff, because quite honestly, I don't want to spend millions of dollars simulating something that doesn't, occurs all the time. It's not very dangerous or risky, and it's really not that difficult to learn. So why would I build a $700,000, exercise or scenario to do that when it'll never pay off? And nor would we want it to. I'd much rather have people learning it a different way. So again, it goes back to what's your intent, because there's a lot, live simulation, constructive simulation, there's all other kinds of, arrangements that you can do that are much more cost effective.
Yeah, and I understand completely where you're coming from. The use of the delivery method, i.e. whether simulation or virtual reality, it is more about what you're trying to achieve. And similarly, if I come to you, Mercelo, around that point, do you see any difference between the two, or is it just a different delivery method, say a simulator versus a VR headset?
This is more related to when immersion brings value, right? It's at the end, it's pretty much the same simulation mechanism, but presented in an immersive way, right? If you see that immersing your employee on that situation can bring you value, so go for VR. Right. Otherwise, you just keep doing your regular simulation as he said, it really depends on the use case.
Yeah, and some of the things I've seen in the past is where people are almost wanting to recreate catastrophic events. What are the consequences of actions? And VR is very good for that from an immersion perspective. Anthony, you're nodding away there. Is that your perspective on it?
Is muted again.
You're on mute.
So for me, it's around, to echo my colleagues' comments, it's about the content, it's about the design. What's the purpose? What are you trying to really solve with it? But completely agree. I think it's that level of immersion that presents you. It allows individuals to very much get that feeling of failure, that feeling of fear, those intense levels. When we're talking about that kind of catastrophic simulation, it allows them to start feeling some of those emotions and help commit some of what they're doing, the actions, to memory. On that same token, it's not just about the hands-on skills. You can also look to the VR and the simulation environment for the soft skills training. How do you, measure human interactions? What does, crew resource management look like? How do you simulate those types of human interactions as well? So for me, it's not just about learning how to perform specific, hand-based actions, but it also, depending on how we leverage simulation and VR, we can also look to start crafting training around human interactions. How do we interact with one another? How do managers interact with their direct reports? So I think for me, it covers the gamut. But again, to echo my colleagues' comments, it's about the purpose. It's ensuring that we're leveraging that technology for the right purpose and not trying to add it into a piece of content to make it more interesting. It really comes down, I think, to the design and the application of that simulation that really brings to light what that training is supposed to deliver.
Yeah, that is a common theme here that we're seeing. So just picking up on some points from earlier on that Mercelo mentioned. So one of the challenges with digital twins in the context of VR is the pace of technological change. So over the last 2 or 3 years, there's been such a rapid pace in the quality of the VR headsets. So what is the challenge from a business perspective on the investment required in an evolving technology space where, you know, the technology is almost redundant the day you buy it? And I'll stick with you, Anthony, on that one.
That's a great question, and it's something I think we contend with daily, and that's really where it's about partnering with your suppliers. It's about very much keeping in tune with what's going on, within the market. Very much determining the partners that you want to have for at least a 3 to 5 year term. That's kind of where we sit within how do we want to forecast for what technologies we're going to invest in, what are we going to research more, and what are we seeing as successful. So I would say right now you could look at about a 3 to 5 shelf life for some of these technologies. Some may be very much shorter. But it's really around picking those technologies that we know are enterprise ready, that have for lack of a better phrase, a very good name behind them. You know they're not going to be going away within the next year or two. So it's very much a partnership with the supplier you select, ensuring that they're going to be around for a period of time, but also making sure that their roadmap includes expansion and building on what they've already developed, and also identifying opportunities where you or we as the business can work with those suppliers and help kind of craft what types of training or what types of accessibilities will be awarded by using any updates to their technology. So it's very much selecting the right supplier, selecting the right technology that does have some exposure already within enterprise organizations, and finding some that will at least last you that 3 to 5 year term. That's what I recommend at this stage.
Yeah, thanks for that, Anthony. And I like the use of the term partnership because I think it's important for these types of things, not transactional. Brent, do you want to give some perspective on that in terms of how?
I love the question, by the way, because it's the heart of doing and what we're trying to do here. So I'm an advocate of technology, but I'm also a pragmatist with technology because I've done it so many times. I mean, I was in it with e-learning in the early 90s. And I'll give you a real example. So I'll get a zillion vendors coming to me telling me they've got the best tool in the world. It's XYZ. If I don't use it, I'm just not very intelligent. And so we'll do a proof of concept to de-risk it. And then, they'll tell me, well, we can do it in 3 months. Well, it takes 9 months. We can do it for $250,000, but it cost me $400,000. And then I say to them, how do I scale that? You did it for one piece of equipment per shell, but I've got 2,400. So to apply your technology, it's going to cost me $750 million in 17 years at your rate. So that's not sustainable. So I'm really a big advocate of saying, look, all of this technology, and you got Moore's law saying that, technology will double every few years. You've got to look at it, and Anthony's right, the half-life of this stuff is 5 years. So when you talk about a Chevron or a BP or a Shell trying to implement at scale, by the time these kind of companies implement, it's 2, 3, 4 years. The next apple's already fallen from the tree, right? So what you've got to do is you've got to think of what can I scale that's reasonable to get the job done, because we're always going to chase the next apple to fall. And that's what I'm really against. So we've even done stuff where we've taken, okay, we can do this in interactive VR, but it'll take us years, or we can use this lower technology where we democratize it, where I can get it in the hands of to help every operator. Might not be the greatest thing since sliced bread, but it's pragmatic and it gets the job done. So this is the tension that we're at right now. It's the dilemma, it's the challenge, and that's what I would advocate companies look at to say, how do you serve the democratized populations that work within your company? And it's great to be innovative and it's great to do the tip of the sword, But quite honestly, that can be an exercise for a segment of your company to work with. If you really need to get to the heart and soul, you got to be a bit more pragmatic.
Yeah, that's good points. And Mercelo, bringing you in on this, using the concept of the partnerships, to what extent do big organizations lean on the supply chain to be part of that kind of understanding the future of technology and actually bringing the solutions, or do the businesses research it themselves?
Yeah, so Chevron has a very solid partnership with Microsoft, right? So we are pretty much using Azure for everything, and our digital twin program at Chevron came out with a vendor agnostic solution, right? Of course, we are always looking for complementary capabilities, right? Because we are not willing to reinvent the wheel. So this partnership is very strong for Chevron, right? And what we're trying to avoid is creating a different platform as a service offerings inside Chevron that will eventually trap our data outside of the Chevron infrastructure, right? So that's a balance that we need to find, right, between leveraging the effort of external vendors with what we need to have control inside the organization.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks.
And Gavin, just one more point to kind of close this off. The partnerships with the Microsofts, the big players, and I think BP, Chevron, and Shell are all having those kind of relationships. That's one way to tackle this, right? So instead of BP, Shell, and Chevron working with, a cast of hundreds of vendors, let's focus and let's really build intellectual capital with those few. But also we're seeing the trend where companies like BP, me and Anthony, or in Chevron, are going to have to work together to deliver things at scale for the industry benefit, because we're all brothers and sisters in a wider industry, and guys like us and gals like us that our job is to make the people in our industry safer and more reliable performers. That's a good cause. So when we can look together to scale things for the betterment, and then we'll always have the antitrust where we say, well, we're all going to do the context to which we deploy it, the actual content that we use and how we construct it in an organization. That'll be how we differentiate. But to give the worker something that's really innovative and helpful to them for industry, that's where we need to get to. So the partnership thing, I see it being much bigger and a much more sustainable route for our industry. So we're going to stop a lot of this competition in terms of the base model. So when things are good, we want to do those things together, and then we'll differentiate in our own houses.
I love that idea of collaboration, and I have seen it in a limited sense in other areas. But big organisations getting their heads together about transformational things is a very encouraging attitude to have. So hopefully we can see some traction around that. Just sticking with kind of technological change, etc. One of the things, if I give an example, we work with McDonald's internationally in relation to VR digital twins. And what they found was, for operational reasons, getting into VR, as in putting the headset on, was challenging for a lot of the restaurants because they didn't have access to the technology. So what they did instead was it was deployed as a first-person shooter style using, PC, keyboard, and mouse. Do you feel that there's a space for the same digital twin but in a different delivery method that maybe loses a bit of the immersion, but you're still getting the same learning outcomes, you're still getting the same engaging experience? And I'll ask that question of Anthony firstly.
Thanks for that, Gavin. I think absolutely. There's definitely room for the simulations that are essentially device agnostic. You can consume them on your laptop, your phone, or via a VR headset if you have one available to you. Knowing that not everyone is comfortable with having a VR headset on, particularly with COVID, the idea of being able to exchange a headset or be able to share those amongst the groups is now just unheard of. So it's there's definitely the opportunity to leverage just computer-based simulation, which is effectively what you're designing. I do believe that VR does add an element of immersion to whatever when used appropriately, it adds that deep level of immersion. It adds a deeper level of immersion when you're talking about training on hands-on skills in particular in that space. So I think there's definitely room to grow in that space. I think it's very much going to be a requirement moving forward, that these types of technologies are very much device agnostic. It's not going to require a VR headset. Will it be good to be a little bit further immersed with the technology or the content? Absolutely. Does it deeply degrade the quality of the content if it's designed in the right way? I don't believe so. I think an individual that may not be comfortable in VR can go through the same, if not a similar simulation via laptop or computer and have a very, very similar, impactful experience. I think it really comes back into the design of how you want to leverage those kinds of technologies. But to answer your question, absolutely. I think there's space for both of those to really add a benefit in training.
Yeah, that's definitely what I see. I think there's an element of immersion lost, but you still, you don't necessarily lose the learning outcomes. Anything to add to that, Brent?
Yeah, I think it's to Anthony's point. It is when you talk about this stuff, you always talk about what does the learner need to train. Do they need to see color? Do they need to see motion? Do they need to hear sound? All those kinds of things. So those are the drivers that help you select the media, right? In Shell, we deployed 20 operational behavioral safety modules. When you deploy them on the cloud, people can only use the joystick and the keyboard. When you do them locally, they can use the immersive headsets. And so what we found is by giving our operators actually a choice, and now we're in the conceptual age where, people get things to their preferences and their adaptability. So if you make your VR solutions more adaptive to the preferences of your end users, that's a good way to go. Why does everything have to be a headset if you can also train it and somebody wants to do it on a PC? So that's the kind of flexibility and adaptability. We don't want another one-size-fits-all world. We want people to say, what are you most comfortable in and what's most effective for your individual learning style? So that's where I'd like to get to, is more adaptive, flexible mechanism to say, if I don't like to be in the headset, you don't have to be in the headset, but you're going to get the learning objectives will be met either way. It's your preference on how you want to achieve those learning objectives.
Yeah, I agree with those points. And Mercelo, just bringing you into the conversation here, do you think the different accessible ways of getting into the digital twin is impacting the learning in any way?
No, absolutely not. I think most of the cases, you can be presenting 3D data for a digital twin in a 2D screen, and it will be totally fine, right? The learning objectives needs to be met. That's the major goal. The way that you're presenting the product should not impact, right? It's awesome that you can offer a more immersive experience by using a headset, but it should not be a limiting factor, right? A limiting factor. So I think people will benefit of using a computer screen and get the same level of benefits depending on the application.
Yeah, great response. Just sort of segueing a little bit out of that sort of topic. What about the application of technology itself? So if we think about the use of the deployment of hardware to a large population, so if we talk about one of your organizations with tens of thousands of staff, does that become a barrier? So if you want VR, is it every guy gets a VR headset, or is it more there's sort of central bases where people access VR? And I'll stick with you on that one, Mercelo.
at Chevron, we have a team that is under the operational technology product line that we call the Connected Worker team, and this team is the team that is managing the use of HoloLens across the corporation. Right. So when a business unit has a use case for HoloLens, they go to the Connected Worker team, and the Connected Worker team will send them the devices, right? That's how we are managing. Of course, we are pretty much working with HoloLens devices. These devices are not cheap, right? We are talking about $3,500 for each device. And of course, we don't expect to buy one device for each of the 60,000 employees that Chevron has across the globe. So it's more of a case by case, right? If they see the value and if we have a good business case, so the Connected Worker team will provide the support for that team to use HoloLens. So at Chevron, what we're trying to do is to come out with a digital twin for most of our complex facilities, right? So we are working with the smart engineering team on the Surface platform to come out with this complex digital twins. So pretty much we are flying drones with LiDAR mounted devices to get 3D point clouds from the aerial view, also mounting on the terrestrial laser scans as well, combining all these in a very large data set of 3D point data. And then we are moving these to a Unity platform that's a game platform, right, as a presentation layer. So there's a huge challenge between you have this data pipeline to create this huge 3D point cloud, and you be able to stream this complex 3D model to a HoloLens devices, right? When you're using it offsite, it's more challenging because you have limitations on your network bandwidth on site, and you pretty much depend on more advanced workflows using remote rendering and other cloud computing. So it's not as easy as just send a device there and everything will be solved.
Yeah, that's a very important point. And Anthony, just bringing you into this, do you think the deployment of expensive hardware to a large population is a limiting factor for the use of VR on a mass scale?
That's a great question. I think to a degree it could be. I know that going into last year, we had greater ambitions in the space of VR that were kind of curtailed a bit by COVID. And to Mercelo's point, we can't move forward with the idea that we're going to buy HoloLens and VR headsets for the tens of thousands that we have in each organization. It's just not a cost-effective solution. So I think it's around, a lot of it's going to be around planning. How do you use that technology in the right way, identify it to use it for the right reasons? But for many of the training I see with VR, HoloLens, those types of headset type technologies, I see that training is very specialized, almost niche to a degree, where you can apply, the management strategy organizationally. But I think it's going to take just a bit more upfront planning and management of the devices themselves to make that accessible to the business, make the content accessible to the end user. So for me, it's really going to be about the planning and upfront. While it does, not everyone's going to get a headset. I do think there are some ways that you can internally plan to distribute a set of these headsets, obviously following, cleaning guidelines and all that stuff for safety purposes. But I do think, I don't think it's going to reduce the overall utilization of the technology. It will reduce how many people have their hands on them at any given time. But I think with the right management and processes in place, you can deploy this type of technology for training, though it will be, in some cases, for very niche audiences or for smaller audiences.
Yeah, I definitely agree with some of those points. And Brent, are you following the same logic in terms of you won't expect VR headsets to be distributed to all members of the workforce and they have to come to a central point in some way?
Yeah, well, I mean, again, you look at the size and scale of Shell and, the footprint. We always have pockets of excellence where some small team in, Australia or somewhere has their own equipment and they're doing great things. But the intent is as an enterprise to scale it. So one of the things that we're doing is we have a global simulation-based learning program, and the intent of the program is to create global capability. And the biggest thing we found with the adoption of technology, it has to be painless, it has to be hassle-free. So what we do is, instead of having pockets of expertise or excellence, we're trying to have a center of expertise. So they can pick up a phone or make an order in one central stop. They have a question about the technology, they need to replace it, something's wrong with it, they can go to. So if you make it easy enough for people, they'll adopt it. But if it's a hassle, I got 12 headsets in the corner and the wires are all tangled and we don't know what to do with them, it becomes paperweights and bookmarks, right? So that's the thing that we want to do, is the adoption of the technology. Half of it, or more than half, is just making it hassle free. And people just want to know, I got a power washer in my garage. I love it, but I hate it. Every time I want to use it, it doesn't work. I got to do it. I got to fix it. I got to call tech support. But when I get it running, boy, I love it all day. I'm playing with it. It's great. I love the thing.
Yeah, that's a great response, and I do share that pain. And there's actually an audience question around something similar, which I'll come back to. But just in the interest of time, what I want to do is I'll give you a little perspective on what we've done as an organisation, and I'm going to open up to some audience Q&A. So I'm just going to run through a couple of slides on some case studies that we as an organisation have done, and then we'll pick up on those questions. So I mentioned at the beginning, we've been working with a number of these organisations on the panel, and I've got a couple of case studies here that I want to run through. But just as a brief introduction to our organisation, I represent 3T Energy Group, which is a collection of companies within the oil and gas training space. So we've got a blend of traditional training organisations, i.e. training centres where guys turn up and do their survival and all the rest of it, which is AIS and SurviveX. But then we've got our digital businesses, which includes simulation and virtual reality, augmented reality, all these types of digital products. And what we've got across our business, which we've been able to bring together, is that kind of blend. And a lot of what we've done is a blend, and it isn't necessarily always one thing or the other. So just a couple of case studies, if I may. One of the big projects we're working on at the moment is with BP. What the challenge for BP is for this particular project was for the development of a new FPSO out in Senegal and Mauritania. So this was a brand new project being constructed in the yard, but they were going through a process of hiring all of the crew for that vessel. And one of the things they wanted to achieve, which they sort of stated at the beginning, was they wanted to create an immersion in the project so that when those crew arrived at the work site, they were completely immersed in that asset as if they'd been working on it for the last 10 years. And it was all around orienteering. It was all around understanding the different operating equipment, any safety critical equipment that was different to what they might have been used to, and also just a general kind of experience of that asset. Now, this program, they originally approached us as a training organization to help them develop a training program. And it was our suggestion to incorporate a digital twin into that to enable them to get the delegates to experience the whole asset and the work site before they ever joined us. And we were able to embed a number of things into that digital twin, which allowed them to carry out competence assessments, orienteering, and other such tasks that they wouldn't otherwise have been able to do. And what we've done is we've embedded that digital twin right at the heart of the learning program. So every member of the crew joining this FPSO is going to come to our training centre in Aberdeen in the UK and spend 4 weeks with us, going through various different types of training delivery. But in every segment of the learning program is going to be some kind of interaction with the digital twin, whether that's a fly through, whether that's a competence assessment, or a team-based exercise. So the use of the digital twin is very adaptive. And the feedback that we're getting from this particular project is absolutely fantastic in the way that we've applied the digital twin into that virtual reality scenario. So It's one of our kind of anchor projects at the moment that we're working on. Coming back a little bit to our own business as well, as I mentioned, we're a training organisation, and we run training courses. And one of the courses we run is a fire training course to the APITO standard. And very often on these courses, you've got, say, 16 guys on the course, but only 4 might be in a scenario at any given time. So you've got 12 guys who are kind of standing around waiting for their turn to go into the fire exercise. So one of the things we wanted to do as a business was try and reduce the idle time for those individuals, but also give them the opportunity to have some pre-learn experiences before they went into the practical exercises. So what we created is a digital twin of our own fireground. So the image you're seeing there is our fireground up in Aberdeen. And what the guys do prior to going in, when they're waiting to take their turn in the real life fire exercise, is they'll do some exercises on orienting around the rig, what they might experience in terms of confined spaces, etc. So it just gives them that little immersion for 5 minutes before they actually go in, just so they're properly oriented on what they're going to go through during that program. And this is really an example of how we practice what we preach as a training organisation, and it really enhances that learner experience and the learner engagement, and the feedback's been phenomenal in terms of how we've tried to differentiate a little bit in terms of how we manage the training program. Finally, one of the other case studies we worked with is an organisation called Sanad out in Saudi Arabia. And the certain jurisdictions where the challenges are often very different in terms of remote sites, etc. And they wanted a really effective way of standardising the way that training for its land rig workers in hazardous awarenesses, where potentially there isn't that ingrained safety culture within some of the regions, is how do they induct people to really understand consequences of actions. So this particular program was very much about catastrophic outcomes. So, what happens if, you don't do this? What happens if you don't select the appropriate PPE? What happens if you don't wear your harness when you're working from height, and so on? And it really gave that immersion in this is what happens if you don't follow the procedures. And that's been a good example of where a digital twin has been deployed in that environment. So just to wrap that up a little bit, I've got a little short video with some examples of digital twins that we have, just a minute long or so. hopefully that's giving people a bit of a perspective on the use of digital twins from a virtual reality perspective. And a couple of questions actually came through there about how VR is being used from a health and safety perspective. So one of the questions that came through a couple of times from various people, which I want to come back to, is around what is the business case for the use of VR digital twins, and how do you assess the return on investment for something that very often is an intangible return? So I'll go to Brent first on that one.
Sure. Any organization has three different levels of training requirements. They have compliance training, so they're obligated to do it and make sure it happens. So, for example, one of the returns on investment that we did is out on rigs, where we had to typically we would fly people from the rig back to Louisiana and the Robert Training Center to get tested, certified, etc. Instead of flying them back and forth, we were able to do a immersive VR that did the training, met the need without the travel. So that's an easy use case, and that's probably one of the clearest ones you'll find. So I'll defer to Anthony as well on that.
Absolutely. So HSE is a huge space for this level of training. It's obviously, I think in my mind, probably one of the most critical and important spaces, because at the end of the day, the simulation in VR gives our trainees, our operators, a safe place to practice and fail and get better at the skills that they learn. They can see the consequences when things go wrong. But they also have the opportunity to learn how to do things the correct way, obviously, but they can also learn how to improve on their activities. So I think in safety and operations, that's, simulation, virtual reality, that's going to be a critical element for us moving forward. We do deliver some levels of training in the space of VR that are fire safety training. When we think about ROIs, that is a challenging piece, right? Because it's about how is VR moving that needle of performance in a different way where other training hasn't. I don't necessarily look specifically to VR as the ROI. I really think of VR as an element of simulation at the end of the day. So I almost put it in that simulation bucket. So when you think about return on investment, a critical piece, and in showing that the training is functioning, but it's got to be more than just looking at the dollars and cents. You can reduce the cost of training by reducing the amount of travel individuals have to do. They can go through training locally on their computers. So you can look to get return on investment cost savings immediately just by reducing travel for individuals having to go different places for training. But when you think specifically about training, you have, from my view, a greater level of view. You have a better view into how the individuals are starting to train. You can see them actually recreating the tasks when you think of simulation. So from an ROI perspective, you can show the financials very quickly, but you can also start to track and see how individuals are performing better as they're doing these hands-on simulated tasks. So from the ROI, the money is really great, but when thinking about safety and operational risk, being able to demonstrate that individuals are performing the tasks better in a more safe and efficient way, that, in my mind, is the critical piece.
Yeah, and that's great to hear, and certainly my experience of people who've embraced VR. Mercelo, just to wrap it up, I guess we've got about a minute and a half left. Do you want to give your perspective on ROI from a VR perspective?
Yeah, so in my opinion, the operational excellence it's more important than the ROI, especially in the beginning, right? You can consider it as an economy of scale. When you scale up your cases, you will start seeing a better ROI. In the beginning, as you are still learning or still beginning, starting your journey, the first projects will not be so interesting in terms of return of investment, right? But as you build the capabilities and you start creating more value and scaling up and delivering in different places for more people, as we mentioned before, you have really easy to perceive benefits for moving people around and getting flights or driving, putting at risk, put themselves at risk in facilities, complex facilities. So all these movements that you can avoid with your workforce will pay off in terms of money, right, and the carbon footprint as well.
Yeah, I'm glad you got that in at the end as well, because it was a question that appeared is, how does it help offset carbon and helping towards our ESG drive? So a good way to close it up. I believe that's our time up. I'm hoping Nicole might come in and confirm that.
Great. Thank you so much, Gavin, Mercelo, Brent, and Anthony, for your great panel discussion this morning. For those in the audience, if you want to listen again, this webinar will be available on demand shortly. And finally, thank you to wherever you are for taking the time to listen in. We look forward to having you on the next session starting in just a few moments. And again, thank you so much for your great discussion this morning, Anthony, Brent, Mercelo, and Gavin. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks all.